Hello, I'm Alan Critchley, an independent social worker, and I write Safeguarding Adult Reviews. Today I'm going to talk to you about Safeguarding Adult Review Bob. Bob's not his real name. Bob was a white British man who was 69 when he died in hospital. He'd been admitted 2 days previously with injuries. These were apparently either from a fall or from an attack. The injuries were very serious and caused his death. The police were given information about potential attackers, but they had to discontinue their investigations due to a lack of evidence. Information was provided for this review by a friend, Jacob, who'd known Bob for some 40 years as both his employer and as a close friend. Jacob confirmed that Bob had originally come from Ireland with his father as a child. He had been in the army and had then been employed in Jacob's father's family firm, which was in the construction heavy machinery business. Jacob explained that Bob was a naturally talented man who could work on and repair any sort of machinery or anything electrical, including televisions. Whilst in the army, Bob had apparently been responsible for the canteen in Berlin, and while he was there, he'd begun to drink. And although he was a heavy drinker from time to time, he wasn't thought to be alcohol dependent at any time. Bob was employed by Jacob's family firm until 2016, and he remained friends with Jacob and other employees up until his death. The flat that Bob lived in had been renovated by Jacob and his company. Jacob and his family remained supportive of Bob and have contributed information to this review. So, what happened to Bob, and how might he have been better protected? Bob was exploited by people who cuckooed him. There was some multi-agency support, but it wasn't enough to protect him, unfortunately. A plan was agreed that Bob would be moved to respite accommodation, but the placement, although it was agreed, came too late and Bob died before he could move there. There were also some opportunities to safeguard and protect Bob that were missed. The potential was there for effective multi-agency work to safeguard Bob, but it wasn't used to any real effect. A referral was made to the local vulnerability panel. He didn't meet the full criteria for the panel because adult social care were working with him, but less formally, they could have used the panel expertise and the members of the panel and the resources of the panel to work with him, but that wasn't explored. Another important bit is that Bob's veteran status could have been acknowledged at the vulnerability panel and agencies reminded of their responsibilities under the Armed Forces Covenant. No one working with Bob seemed to have known that he was working in the armed forces, that is apart from adult social care, who hadn't passed the information on. It may be that other agencies hadn't asked Bob himself about it. Although, if you ask Bob his life story, he talked about having been on a 40-year bender since his discharge from the army, so he's like to talk about his army career. The Armed Forces Covenant applies to many agencies and bodies, including central government, local government, and housing providers. The Covenant accepts that those discharged from the forces may require support beyond that required for non-veterans and places a legal duty on providers and commissioners to provide that support. Now, I think that Bob effectively, and through no fault of his own, just gave up. His health was poor, as were his living conditions. The isolation of COVID took its toll, and the day-to-day presence of those who exploited him by cuckooing was exceptionally difficult for him to manage. They regularly took his money, his phone, and anything else that was given to him. They also assaulted him physically. A care package agreed in November 23 provided for practical support for Bob, but didn't address his other needs, including his well-being and his emotional state. The provision of an assessment bed was suggested and was the right option for Bob, but, as I said earlier, it didn't materialise in time. Up until COVID, this review was told that Bob was independent and able to support himself. He also had friends and neighbours who were able to support him. In the experience of me writing this review, the support that he had from friends and neighbours was actually quite unique. Bob was very special to them, and he remained cared for by them right up until his death. Now, at times, he had a mobile phone, and his friend Jacob used to provide him with mobile phones, but almost on a weekly basis, this was taken from him or stolen from him by those who were cuckooing him. This meant that when Bob needed to call for help, he couldn't because he had no phone. Again, he was reliant on friends and neighbours, and he was fortunate that he did have people looking out for him and able to call the emergency services when he needed them. What could have been considered was a partial closure order with regard to Bob's flat. This would have been obtained under the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. And during the course of this review, this was suggested to the police, who agreed that the order could have been sought. It would have meant that they had to gather relevant evidence of antisocial behaviour, but this might well have been possible by using the neighbours to report incidents as well as Bob. A partial closure notice would have meant that those who exploited Bob were excluded from his flat. Those who helped him would have been allowed in. This would have given the police grounds to enforce the exclusion of those who sought to harm Bob. Once granted by a court, the notice lasts for 3 months and would have brought time for Bob to be supported into alternative accommodation with a full support plan. Now, the recommendations that I've made from this review are, firstly, that agencies involved in the review have a way of knowing the veteran status of those they work with, and that they should assure the Kent Medway Safeguarding Adult Board that they have spread awareness of the Armed Forces Covenant throughout their organisation, and that they've provided any guidance that they need to support the application of the Armed Forces Covenant. So awareness of the Armed Forces Covenant is recommendation 1. Recommendation 2, that the Kent Police provide the Safeguarding Adult Board with a briefing on both full and partial closure notices, and that this is circulated to agencies so that they know the circumstances in which they can apply. Recommendation 3 is about cuckooing, and as I make this video, the legislation is going through Parliament at the moment. It will be called Home Takeover, and it's part of the Crime and Policing Act. So my recommendation 3 is that the Safeguarding Adult Board follow what's happening with the Crime and Policing Act and let all agencies know when it's in force and how agencies can then work to tackle cuckooing, better known by then as home takeover. My thanks to you for listening.